The sound of chains clanging against metal still echoes in my head. My wife, pale and struggling to breathe, was inside the hospital fighting for her life. And outside, this HOA, Karen had the nerve to lock her car to a post, claiming it violated community parking rules. I begged her, told her my wife had a weak heart and every second mattered. She just smirked, waved a clipboard, and said, "Rules are rules." I ran back inside for help, and that's when the truth came crashing down, because that chained car didn't just belong to my wife. It belonged to someone far more powerful. Within 20 minutes, flashing lights, security footage, and the roar of a convoy turned the hospital parking lot into a storm of justice she never saw coming. And before I tell you what happened next, comment your city below and hit subscribe because this story gets wild. I never thought a routine hospital visit would turn into a nightmare. My wife, Emily, has lived with a fragile heart since her mid-20s. Every trip to the hospital is a race against time. Her chest tightening, lips losing color, and me praying the traffic lights stay green. That morning, her condition worsened out of nowhere. I barely got her into the car before her breathing went shallow. By the time we reached the hospital, I could hear her whispering my name, weak and fading. I parked right outside the emergency entrance, hazard lights blinking, and rushed to get a nurse. But when I came back out, I froze. Her car, my wife's car, was chained to a pole, padlocked, and blocked by a smug woman in a neon orange dress and oversized sunglasses. Clipboard in hand, she said she was just enforcing HOA policy. I told her this wasn't a neighborhood driveway, this was a hospital emergency zone. She didn't care. She pointed at a sign and threatened a fine for illegal parking. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just arrogance, it was cruelty. But what she didn't know was who that car really belonged to. My wife wasn't driving her own car that morning. She'd borrowed it from her cousin, who happened to be the governor of the state. So when Karen chained that car, she didn't just cross a moral line, she stepped straight into political disaster. And within hours, the whole state would be talking about her name. But before I dive into how this woman went from barking about community rules to being escorted by state police in handcuffs, tell me, what city are you watching from? Drop it below and subscribe, because this story will remind you. Sometimes karma doesn't knock. It roars in with sirens. That morning started like any other, until it didn't. Emily had been feeling dizzy since dawn, brushing it off as exhaustion. She insisted she was fine, even tried making breakfast, but halfway through her hands started trembling and the color drained from her face. I remember the sound of the plate slipping from her fingers, shattering on the kitchen tiles. She leaned against the counter, clutching her chest, whispering, "It's happening again." My heart jumped. I grabbed her purse, her medication, and practically carried her to the car. The streets blurred past as I sped toward Westfield General Hospital, every red light feeling like a curse. My knuckles were white around the steering wheel. The digital clock on the dashboard felt like a countdown I couldn't stop. When I reached the hospital entrance, I saw the emergency loading zone. Cars weren't supposed to park there, but Emily was fading fast. I slammed the brakes, threw on the hazards, and shouted for help. 2 nurses rushed out with a wheelchair. Emily's head rolled back, her breathing shallow. I stayed long enough to see her being wheeled into the ER before running to the counter to fill in her details. 5 minutes later, when I stepped outside to move the car, my stomach dropped. The spot where I'd parked looked different. I heard the metallic clank before I saw it. A thick steel chain looped through the car's wheel, padlocked to a yellow post. And standing right next to it, like a villain from a bad dream, was her, Karen. Neon orange dress, clipboard, phone in hand, and that expression of smug authority. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's my car. My wife's in the ER. She's a heart patient." She didn't even look up. "You can't park here. HOA regulations prohibit." HOA. I blinked. "This is a hospital, not a neighborhood." Karen's lips curled. "This facility is managed by the Oak Ridge Community Board, which falls under HOA jurisdiction. You people think rules don't apply when it's convenient. You people." The words burned. I took a step closer. Listen, I don't care about your board. My wife could die in there. Unlock this right now. She finally looked up, eyes sharp as glass. Rules are rules. You can speak to the property manager during office hours. Until then, the vehicle stays secured. I felt my jaw clench. For a second, I couldn't even form words. I looked back at the ER doors. Every second mattered. I tried reasoning with her again, told her I'd pay the fine, told her to just take the lock off, but she ignored me, snapping pictures of the car like she was documenting a crime. By then, a small crowd had started watching, hospital staff, a few patients waiting on benches, even a security guard walking by. Everyone was staring at this ridiculous scene unfolding while my wife was inside fighting for her life, and that's when something inside me broke. I pulled out my phone, dialed the number of my wife's cousin, the one she'd borrowed the car from, the governor. He picked up after 2 rings. I didn't even greet him properly. The words just poured out. What had happened, who chained the car, where we were. He went silent for a second, then said in a calm but dangerous tone, "Stay right there. Don't touch the car. I'm sending someone." I had no idea what he meant by someone, but I was about to find out, because 20 minutes later, Karen's little power trip was about to collide head-on with a level of authority she couldn't begin to comprehend. And when the black SUV started rolling into the parking lot with flashing blue lights, the crowd's silence turned into murmurs. Karen straightened up, clutching her clipboard like a shield. But even she couldn't hide the tremor in her hands when a man in a suit stepped out and flashed the governor's seal. It was the calm before the storm. And she had no idea she was standing at the center of it. Karen didn't flinch when the first black SUV stopped near the entrance. She actually smirked, assuming it was hospital security finally coming to deal with me. Her chin lifted, and she muttered under her breath, "About time someone handles these rule breakers." But her confidence began to falter when the doors opened and 3 men in black suits stepped out, one of them flashing an official state badge. A fourth followed, wearing a pin with the state seal gleaming under the sunlight. The murmurs in the crowd swelled. Even the nurses near the glass doors stopped what they were doing. Karen turned to me, her voice sharp and dismissive. "You called the cops on yourself?" "Great idea." I folded my arms. "I didn't call the cops, Karen." That's when the lead officer approached. "Sir, are you Mr. Adams?" "Yes," I said. He gave a polite nod. "We received a direct call from the governor's office." "Is this the vehicle in question?" Karen's face drained of color. "Governor's office?" she repeated, her voice breaking slightly. "What are you talking about?" Before anyone could answer, another SUV rolled in, this one with tinted windows and a small flag on the front. The crowd gasped. Karen's eyes flickered from the car to the chain, then back to me, trying to piece together what was happening. The door opened, and out stepped a tall man in a gray suit, Governor Charles Bennett, my wife's cousin. His presence alone changed the atmosphere. Even the security guard stood straighter. The governor didn't yell. He didn't need to. His calm, razor-sharp tone carried more weight than any outburst could. "Who is responsible for this?" he asked, his gaze locked on the chained car. Karen straightened her shoulders, attempting to reclaim her authority. "Sir, I was simply enforcing community parking rules. This vehicle was illegally parked in a restricted zone." "I have photographic evidence." "Restricted zone?" he interrupted. "This is an emergency hospital entrance," Karen stuttered. "Yes, but according to the HOA," he held up his hand. "Let me stop you right there." He turned to the officer beside him. "Please unlock this vehicle immediately and run her ID." Karen blinked. "Excuse me? You can't just—" "Ma'am," the officer said firmly, "step aside." The chain was cut within seconds. Karen stood frozen, gripping her clipboard so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her confidence evaporated the moment she realized she'd not only interfered with a medical emergency, but had done it to the governor's car. The governor walked closer, his tone now colder. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "You delayed a patient's emergency care. You obstructed access to state property. And you did it because you thought your clipboard made you powerful." Karen's lips trembled. "I didn't know whose car it was," she said quickly, "and no one told me there was a medical situation." I stepped forward, unable to stay silent. "I told you," I said. I told you my wife was in the ER fighting for her life. You laughed and said rules are rules. The crowd fell silent. Even the hospital staff nearby were shaking their heads. Karen looked around for support, but there was none. The governor sighed heavily, rubbing his forehead. You know, I deal with policy violations every day. But cruelty? That's harder to ignore. He motioned to one of his aides. Get the hospital director on the phone. I want a full report of this incident, and make sure this woman's actions are documented for the record. Karen's voice cracked. Sir, please, it was just a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? He repeated softly. You chained an emergency vehicle during a medical crisis. You didn't misunderstand anything, you just didn't care. Her clipboard slipped from her hands and hit the pavement with a hollow clack. The officers took her aside for questioning, and the crowd began whispering louder, phones out, cameras rolling. I didn't care about the spectacle. All I wanted was to check on Emily. But as I turned to leave, Karen reached out and grabbed my sleeve. Please, she whispered, eyes glossy with fear. Tell him I didn't mean harm. I'll lose everything. I looked at her, remembering her mocking tone just 30 minutes ago. My wife could have lost her life, I said quietly. You already took more than you realize. I walked back toward the hospital doors as the sirens echoed again, this time not for an ambulance but for her arrest. Behind me, cameras flashed. The governor spoke briefly to reporters, stating only, no one is above compassion, and no one is above the law. Karen was escorted to a patrol car, the very chains she used now symbolic of her own downfall. And as I stepped back into the hospital corridor, one thought stayed with me. This wasn't over yet. Because once Emily woke up, the truth about what happened would spread faster than any headline. When I stepped back into the hospital, my heart was racing, not just from anger, but from the adrenaline of everything that had unfolded outside. Nurses were moving fast, monitors beeping, and I could hear Emily's weak voice from the emergency bay. She was awake now, pale but breathing. Relief flooded me, but the chaos wasn't over yet. Because just as I reached her bedside, a security officer entered the ER holding a body cam, one that had captured the entire chain incident from start to finish. Outside, Karen's arrest wasn't going quietly. She was still trying to talk her way out of it, claiming harassment, abuse of authority, and even that I had provoked her. But what she didn't know was that several people had recorded her confrontation from different angles: nurses, bystanders, even a patient's relative in the waiting area. Her arrogance had turned into the very evidence that would destroy her. Meanwhile, the governor's assistant entered the ER to check on Emily. He spoke softly, respectful, but his tone carried that subtle firmness of someone representing power. Mrs. Adams, how are you feeling? He asked. Emily tried to speak, but her voice broke. I just wanted to park close. I didn't mean to cause trouble. He smiled reassuringly. You didn't. Someone else did. When I explained everything to Emily, how the governor himself had shown up, her eyes widened. Charlie came here? She whispered, disbelief mixing with exhaustion. I nodded. But moments later, a nurse entered, looking uneasy. Sir, she said to me, the woman outside, the one who chained your car, she's demanding to speak with you before the police take her. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed to walk away, but a part of me wanted closure. So I stepped outside again. Karen was standing near the patrol car, wrists cuffed but still talking fast. Her orange dress looked almost absurd under the flashing red and blue lights. When she saw me, she tried to straighten her posture. You, she said, voice trembling between anger and panic. You could have told me you knew the governor. You set me up! I stared at her, barely able to believe her words. You think this was about who I know? My wife was dying in there, and you chained her car for a power trip. She shook her head violently. You don't understand how it works. The HOA board has strict orders. Vehicles in restricted areas must be secured. If I ignored it, I'd lose my position. Your position? I snapped. You risked someone's life to protect your clipboard title. That's not enforcement, that's ego. The officer beside her spoke up. Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent. But Karen wouldn't stop. This isn't fair. You people think you can humiliate me because of who you know. The governor stepped forward again, his calm voice cutting through the noise. "Ma'am, this isn't about who anyone knows. It's about what you did. There are witnesses, camera footage, and medical records showing how your interference delayed emergency care. I suggest you stop talking." That finally silenced her. By that afternoon, local reporters had already arrived. The story was spreading fast. HOA enforcer detains governor's vehicle at hospital emergency zone. Heart patient nearly suffers cardiac arrest. Karen's name was trending online before she even reached the station. Her picture, still in that neon orange dress, was plastered across local news feeds. The same smug expression that once made people roll their eyes now made them furious. Inside the hospital, Emily's condition stabilized, but the emotional toll lingered. She kept asking if it was really worth all this attention. I told her the truth. It wasn't about attention. It was about accountability. People like Karen had bullied and controlled others under the name of rules for far too long. This time, she picked the wrong target. Later that evening, as the governor came by to check in, he looked at me and said, "You did the right thing calling me. But more importantly, you stayed calm. That's what exposed her." I nodded, but deep down I wasn't calm. Because even though Karen was behind bars for the night, I had a gut feeling she wasn't done yet. HOA types rarely admit defeat. They just look for another rule to hide behind. And I was right. The next morning, my phone buzzed nonstop. Reporters, HOA members, even neighbors I hadn't heard from in years, all calling to ask about the incident. But one message stood out. A formal statement from the HOA board, distancing themselves from Karen. They claimed she acted independently and without proper authorization. Translation, she was officially thrown under the bus. Yet even as justice started catching up with her, the real exposure was only beginning. Because when the hospital security shared the full CCTV footage publicly, the world saw the moment she laughed while I begged her to remove the chain, and that clip broke the internet overnight. Millions of views, thousands of comments, people tagging their own HOA horror stories. Karen had become the face of everything wrong with unchecked authority, and as much as I wanted peace, I couldn't deny it. Seeing the truth out there, seeing people finally hold someone like her accountable, it felt right. But this story wasn't over yet, because what happened the next day would turn Karen's public humiliation into something far more permanent, a legal reckoning she never imagined coming. By the next morning, the hospital parking lot that had been filled with chaos now felt eerily calm. But the real storm had moved online and into the governor's office. Overnight, the CCTV footage went viral. News anchors replayed the clip of Karen wrapping a heavy metal chain around the car tire while I shouted that my wife couldn't breathe. Comment sections were exploding. "Who does that at a hospital? She deserves to lose her job." Finally, an HOA Karen gets what's coming. But beyond the noise, the evidence was airtight. The hospital's internal security feed, dash cam footage from one of the governor's convoy vehicles, and several bystander recordings all told the same story: deliberate obstruction, verbal harassment, and reckless endangerment during a medical emergency. By noon, the governor's press secretary held a briefing outside the state office. Cameras flashed as she read the statement. An HOA enforcement officer unlawfully detained the governor's state-issued vehicle outside a hospital emergency entrance, delaying a critical care response. The governor has ordered a full investigation into the misuse of authority within private neighborhood associations operating on public or emergency access grounds. It was no longer just a viral scandal, it was becoming policy reform. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, I sat beside Emily as she rested. She looked fragile, wires attached to her chest, her heartbeat finally stable. When she opened her eyes, she gave me a weak smile. "Did it stop?" she whispered. "All that noise outside?" I nodded. "It's quiet now. You just rest, okay?" She squeezed my hand. "You always protect me." Before I could respond, a knock came at the door. The governor walked in. No cameras, no press, just family now. His expression softened as he saw Emily awake. "You scared the life out of us, kiddo," he said, pulling a chair beside her bed. "I'm sorry," Emily whispered. I just wanted to be close to the ER entrance. I didn't think someone would actually chain the car. He smiled gently. You didn't do anything wrong. And she, his tone darkened, is being held accountable. He turned to me. The district attorney's already reviewing the footage. They're pressing charges for unlawful restraint of an emergency vehicle and obstruction of medical assistance. There's no wriggling out of this one. I nodded slowly, the weight of everything finally catching up. Good, I said quietly. Because if I hadn't called you... He placed a hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing. Most people don't fight back, they just let it slide. But when power goes unchecked, this is what happens. It's time someone drew the line. That same afternoon, the governor invited me to sit in on a private review session at the courthouse. I hesitated, but he insisted. You need to see how far these rules were allowed to go, he said. Inside the courthouse, a digital projector displayed screenshots from Karen's HOA manual. There were pages of arbitrary fines and restrictions, some targeting residents who parked near public access zones, others threatening to tow cars interfering with aesthetic order. None of it had legal authority on hospital property. The district attorney turned to the governor and said, this could become a state-level issue. These HOAs are crossing jurisdiction lines. Karen sat on the opposite side of the room, eyes red, face pale. Her lawyer was speaking quietly, but she wasn't listening. Every time a clip of her mocking tone played, her shoulders slumped lower. The moment they played the audio of me begging her to unlock the car while shouting that my wife couldn't breathe, Karen broke. She covered her face with both hands and started sobbing. But it was too late. The DA announced the charges. Obstruction of emergency services, felony, negligent endangerment of a medical patient, trespassing on state property with intent to interfere her. Lawyer tried to argue it was a mistake, but the judge interrupted. A mistake is forgetting to issue a ticket. Chaining a car during a medical crisis is willful disregard for life. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy was unstoppable. Protesters gathered holding signs reading, Justice for Emily and End HOA Abuse. It had gone from a personal nightmare to a statewide conversation about unchecked neighborhood power. That evening, the governor spoke again, this time live on television. This incident, he said firmly, is not about one woman's cruelty. It's about the culture that allowed her to think she was untouchable. From today, emergency zones across the state are exempt from HOA control. Compassion must come before policy. As his words echoed across the airwaves, I looked at Emily, sitting upright now, holding my hand. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time not from fear. Maybe something good will come out of this, she whispered. I nodded, my throat tightening. It already has, because as the governor's convoy lights faded into the night, I knew that the evidence didn't just expose one heartless act. It exposed a system that had needed reform for years, and while Karen's orange dress became a meme across social media, I didn't laugh. I just looked at my wife, alive, breathing, and felt something far deeper than satisfaction. Justice wasn't loud. It was quiet. It looked like a woman finally safe in her hospital bed, and a man realizing he'd done right by her. The following week, the HOA office where Karen worked looked like a ghost town. Reporters had camped outside the entrance, snapping photos of every employee who dared step in or out. What once was a quiet neighborhood office, where Karen strutted around giving out fines for mailbox paint, and lawn height, was now the epicenter of a public scandal. The governor's press team confirmed that Karen was suspended indefinitely pending trial, but the impact rippled far beyond her. The Oak Ridge HOA board issued a public apology, claiming they had no prior knowledge of her actions and were deeply disturbed by the incident. Yet leaked emails told a different story, memos approving Karen's strict enforcement approach, even suggesting she set an example for residents who parked near restricted areas. Those emails blew up on social media within hours, turning what was once a local embarrassment into a statewide reckoning. By the third day, national media picked it up. Morning talk shows debated whether HOAs had too much power. One host read out loud from the transcript of Karen's confrontation, Her words, "Rules are rules," echoing across television screens nationwide. Another called it the cruelest display of misplaced authority ever recorded. Meanwhile, Emily was recovering steadily. The doctors said her heart had stabilized, and the hospital planned to discharge her soon. But when she looked at her phone, she gasped. "Mark," she whispered, "they made a hashtag about it." Justice for Emily was trending across multiple platforms. Thousands of people shared their own HOA horror stories. Elderly neighbors fined for wind chimes, veterans cited for hanging flags, single moms threatened for overnight guests. Emily scrolled through the comments, tears filling her eyes. "Maybe what happened to us will change something," she said quietly. Still, despite the public outrage, part of me didn't feel peace. I wanted accountability, not fame. The videos had millions of views, but viral justice doesn't always last. I wanted to make sure the system that enabled Karen's cruelty could never harm another family again. So when the governor called me into his office one afternoon, I wasn't surprised. "Mark," he said, "I'm drafting a state bill to regulate HOA authority in emergency zones. I want you there when we announce it." I blinked. "Me?" He smiled. "You lived it. People will listen to you more than they will to any politician." The following week, I stood beside him at the state capitol. Cameras lined the room as he signed the Community Compassion and Accountability Act, banning HOAs from exercising authority over hospitals, schools, fire stations, or any state or county property. The crowd applauded as the cameras clicked, and for the first time since that horrific morning, I felt a real sense of closure, but not everyone celebrated. Karen's attorney released a public statement trying to reframe her as a misguided enforcer rather than a villain. He said she had been mentally pressured by workplace expectations and deserved leniency. The internet didn't buy it. Screenshots of her smug grin, her clipboard, her words, "You people think rules don't apply when it's convenient," were now iconic symbols of arrogance. When her trial began 2 weeks later, the courthouse steps overflowed with protesters and news crews. The jury didn't take long. The verdict: guilty on all 3 counts. She was sentenced to 9 months in county jail and ordered to perform community service at a hospital of all places. Irony, I thought, sometimes writes its own poetry. After the sentencing, the governor approached me quietly in the corridor. "This won't undo what you went through," he said, "but you've helped fix something much bigger." I looked at Emily standing beside me, alive, smiling faintly. That's all I ever wanted. Later that night, as we drove home, the city lights blurred through the windshield. Emily leaned her head on my shoulder. "Do you think she'll ever understand what she did?" she asked softly. I sighed. Maybe, or maybe people like her never do. They only understand what it feels like when the chain's on them. The words hung in the air, cold, final, but true. When we reached home, the neighborhood was quiet. No HOA notices, no fines, no harassment, just silence. I parked in our driveway and looked up at the night sky. Somewhere out there, thousands of people had watched our story and felt less powerless. That, I thought, was enough. And as I tucked Emily into bed that night, I realized something profound. Justice doesn't always roar. It sometimes whispers through small victories. Quiet reforms and the knowledge that the next desperate husband won't have to beg someone, like Karen for mercy outside a hospital door. That was the real fallout. The world saw what cruelty looks like when it hides behind a clipboard. And this time, the world didn't look away. Months passed, but the memory of that day never left me. Every time I drove past Westfield General Hospital, my hands would tighten on the steering wheel. I could still hear the chains clinking, the metallic echo of arrogance that nearly cost my wife her life. Yet now, every time I looked at Emily, healthy, smiling, slowly regaining her strength, I felt that maybe, just maybe, the universe had a strange way of balancing things. The story had become bigger than us. Documentaries, news podcasts, and online interviews kept revisiting the HOA Karen Hospital case. Some focused on the governor's policy changes. Others called it the day common sense won. But for me, it wasn't about fame or reform. It was about empathy. about reminding people that sometimes following rules blindly is more dangerous than breaking them. One evening, Emily and I were invited to a televised interview. I was hesitant, but she insisted. "If sharing this helps even one person think before acting heartless," she said, "then it's worth it." We sat under bright studio lights as the host leaned forward, voice gentle. "Mark, Emily, when you look back at that day, what's the one thing that stays with you?" Emily spoke first. "The fear," she said softly. "Not just of dying, but of realizing how quickly people can lose their humanity in the name of authority. I was fighting for my breath, and someone was fighting for a parking rule." The audience went quiet. Then the host turned to me. "And you?" I took a breath. "The silence," I said. When I begged her to unlock that chain, there was a moment where she just stared at me, cold, detached. I'll never forget that look. It taught me something. The most dangerous people aren't the ones who yell or threaten. They're the ones who feel nothing while others suffer. That clip was replayed millions of times online. Teachers used it in classrooms discussing ethics. Law students cited it in debates about power misuse. It had become more than a viral story. It was a moral lesson carved into modern conscience. But the most unexpected moment came months later, when a letter arrived at our home. The handwriting was shaky. The return address, a local rehabilitation center. Inside, a single page read, "Mr. and Mrs. Adams, I don't expect forgiveness, but I owe you an apology." You were right. I didn't care until it was me on the other side of the rules. I was transferred to a hospital for community service. The first time I heard someone gasp for air, I realized what I did to you. I can't undo it, but I'm trying to change. Karen Emily read it twice before setting it down. "Do you believe her?" she asked. I thought for a long time. "Maybe not fully," I admitted. "But I believe guilt can make people see themselves for who they are." She nodded slowly. "Then maybe that's justice, too." From that day on, we didn't talk much about Karen again. Life started to heal in quiet ways. Sunday breakfasts, hospital checkups that ended with laughter, and long drives without flashing lights or chaos. The fear that once gripped us began to fade, replaced by a calm gratitude for every ordinary moment. Still, sometimes I'd catch Emily watching the news when new stories of HOA abuse appeared. She'd sigh, look at me, and whisper, "They never learn." And I'd smile faintly and say, "Maybe they will, because now the world's watching." A year later, the governor honored Emily at a state event for inspiring compassion through adversity. The applause echoed through the marble hall as she stood on stage, her voice trembling but strong. "I'm not special," she said. "I'm just someone who needed help and was denied it. If you ever have to choose between enforcing a rule and saving a life, choose the life." The room erupted in applause. But I just sat there, tears in my eyes, thinking how far we'd come. That night, as we walked home hand in hand, Emily looked up at the sky and said, "Funny how something so cruel ended up changing so much." I squeezed her hand. "That's the thing about storms," I said. "They destroy, but they also clear the air." And as we stood there under the soft glow of the streetlights, I realized that our story wasn't one of revenge. It was one of redemption. A reminder that no chain, no rule, no arrogance stands stronger than the will of a person fighting for someone they love. Because at the end of the day, kindness doesn't need authority. It needs courage. And that, more than any punishment or law, was the justice that truly mattered. So, after everything that happened, here's what I've learned. Compassion doesn't need a title, and humanity doesn't ask for permission. My wife could have lost her life that day, all because someone chose pride over empathy. And yet, in the end, the same cruelty that tried to chain us down became the spark that changed laws, hearts, and lives. If you're watching this right now, remember, one voice, one act of courage, can make a difference. Don't let anyone's authority make you feel small when you're standing up for what's right. And if you've ever faced someone who hid behind rules just to hurt you, know that karma has a long memory. Now I want to hear from you. And what city are you watching from? Drop it below in the comments. And before you go, hit that subscribe button. Because stories like this deserve to be heard.